And that leads to what I wanted to focus on today, and we'll try to be efficient so that we can have some questions because what I'd love to do is discuss. But I think most people, Aiden, as your experience describes, most people when they see images of as happened with the screening that you watched, her powerful story is actually witnessing an abortion and seeing that fetus try to move away from a needle or try to get away from pain and a desire to live. And I think you just can't. We know now because of images that our young people, Gen Z, millennials, have been able to see images from way early on, and they can tell those fingers and toes, this is life. And so I think that is understood for the most part, different than it was in 1973. But the question is, well, what about women? Right? What about, because people care about women, care about their agency, care about their autonomy, care about their dignity, and what is it meant for women? So I just wanted to talk about that for a minute and to preface it. You probably already know this well, maybe better than I. I've heard multiple mission presidents describe what it's like to have a new convert who's seeking baptism come and meet with that mission president about a past that involved abortion. And in every case, the emotion is such a profound expression of the pain that they have carried because of that, even if it was normalized when they made that decision, even if it seemed like a way of honoring themselves. And so just recently, a therapist was telling me how shocking it was. She's a new therapist to encounter that women and abortion is actually similar in treatment that it requires to sexual abuse as a child. The wound that is part of that is very core and very deep. And so she did not anticipate that at all. And yet, watching these women who assumed it was an appropriate thing, felt empowered, in that notion, watching them heal from that has been significant for her. So these are very deep things. That's why it matters that we try to do all that we can to help protect life, including the lives and souls of women. So I wanted to just kind of unpack this. What has abortion on demand meant for women? And I think um, hopefully this will, I've really appreciated Erica Bakayaki, who's a dignitarian feminist. Her talk about the history of how societies have dealt with the life-giving power of women from the beginning. How have societies handled this sexual asymmetry? Because I think your friend, Aiden, like most of us, would feel like, well, why should a woman bear the burden that is life, bringing life to life and caring for that life? There is a sexual asymmetry. Men do not bear that. They don't have the same repercussion when they engage sexually. And so the question is, how do we handle this? And if we look through time, Aristotle, interestingly enough, and there are statements from Aristotle where he saw women as inferior, that we've had to unpack, but also some powerful ideas about the capacity of human beings to excellence, to order their lives to excellence. But his notion was women really reach perfection only inside the household, and that her biological functions, her capacity to bear life, is her defining capacity, and that determines her social and familial role. And so his recommendation that women should not be participating in public life, should not be outside of that domain of the household. That is they are somewhat inferior to men, but this capacity should be respected and honored within the household. Plato, on the other hand, his student, in reaction to that, would say, actually, it's women's reproductive capacity that's a hindrance to them. So Aristotle saw it as their defining feature, and Plato saw it as a hindrance. And so his notion was in order for women to be fully socially, politically equal, then we would take children from them and have them raised by wet nurses or nannies. And then we could protect their access to participating in the full political environment. And so the idea was this is sort of a problem. And so we need life, but we'll take those children and have them raised by somebody else because women should be involved fully politically. And that he saw this as a liability, their ability to bear life. So, interestingly enough, hundreds of years later, we come to early feminism, which was the British movement around feminism. And I really have marveled at this mantra that they had: votes for women, chastity for men. And the idea was this capacity to bear life is incredibly significant. And rather than adopting an unchaste life, being promiscuous sexually, men should be called into chastity to be strongly tied to the life that they helped bring to existence and to care for women who are vulnerable, inherently economically vulnerable when they give life and bear life. So women should have access to the public sphere, rights such as voting and owning of property, and men should be called into responsibility to help nurture the life that is born by women. And so Erica will describe Justice, she's done a lot of work on Justice Ginsburg, but at the time, Justice Ginsburg was a strong advocate for the idea that women could not be excluded from any employment opportunities, but employers should accommodate childbearing. They should respect, honor, and create space for that and protect it. Now, some decades later, we end up back to, in a sense, where Plato was, which is women's reproductive function is the source of their subordination that we can see in the Supreme Court decision-making process around abortion, including in 1992 with their follow-up decision, that women were seen as sort of dysfunctional men in the sense that they have this problem that when they have sex, they bear life and it makes them vulnerable. It makes them less able in a sense. And so women's reproductive function is the source of their subordination. And if we had widespread access to contraception and if abortion on demand could be allowed, then women would be freed from the liability of their sexed embodiment, the fact that when they engage sexually, they bear life and it makes them vulnerable. So we're just seeing how societies have wrestled with this. What does it mean? And how do we treat women? How do we honor that capacity? So in the Votes for Women, Chastity for Men, this was not a women's movement that led to the separation and severance of the sexes. It wasn't women fighting men and seeking autonomy from men. It was the sexes moving closer to each other in that men also became responsible for that life and for caring for women in the process of bearing life. And that meant they favored raising this standard of sexual conduct so that they would equal women's standard of sexual conduct. Not a sexual conduct of promiscuity, but raising men to a higher level of conduct as a way of addressing the fact that we are sexually asymmetrical. You know, of course, what happened in the sexual revolution is the opposite happened. It was women could be more like men if they had access to contraception and acted against that life-giving power. And so rather than raising the sexual standard of men, it was taking on the sexual standard of men, of promiscuity as the liberated way of being. So sexual liberation just now meant, well, women could have sex without consequence. And the idea was now she has total control over her fertility rather than being chained by the burden and the burden of bearing life of her sexual capacity. So of course, the implication was now it's my body, my choice. Men are inherently eliminated from the responsibility for creating life. And so you see an increase of out-of-wedlock childbearing from 5% to 40%, 41% among some segments of our working class populations. That's as high as 78 and 80%. And so did it liberate women? Well, obviously not. It liberated men, in a sense, from responsibility for life. And so the most vulnerable children anywhere are children born to unmarried parents. And that mother who bears the responsibility for providing and doing all of it on her own, because again, it was my body, my choice. Or women having to choose between destroying that dependent life or rearing children on their own. And so one of the fallouts of Roe v. Wade was a dramatic increase in the feminization of poverty. That just simply means that we have a much higher percentage of the impoverished being represented by women themselves, single mothers who are bearing life. So this notion of liberation ended up being the opposite for women, which I know you know already. And in addition to that, now with sex outside of marriage expected, now this is the expected pathway, then we no longer had women, in a sense, being able to say to men, as they had prior to sexual liberation in the late 1960s, when he wanted to have sex with her, she would say implicitly, you need to be marriageable before I have sex with you because I risk pregnancy, which means I become very dependent. And of course, marriageable, a marriageable man meant he was trustworthy, could provide for her, and would be someone that she could rely upon. And so what's happened in the fallout sense is we have lost that pathway to development that men depended on because sexual desire was a very important catalyst to men's development. That doesn't make them somehow less than women. It's just that beautiful complementarity of men and women where erotic energy, sexual desire became a channeling for men in developing, becoming more educated, more capable of providing. And so now we have literally our working class men are falling out the bottom. They are not working and they are not pursuing education. And the gap between women's attainment of bachelor's degrees and higher education degrees is growing wider and wider. It is a bigger gap today with women receiving more education than men in that form than it was in the inverse before women could pursue education at a college level. So we have a significant gap with men less developed in a sense than they had been in the past. And at the same time, what's happening in sexual intimacy is it's a male sexual pathway that women follow. Women want sexual intimacy within a safe and committed relationship. That's when she is able to experience more fulfillment. Men are more able, in a sense, to have multiple sexual partners and that kind of thing. And so what's happened is women now accommodate men's sexual pathway as opposed to the other way. So that's why you have really high rates of problematic kind of non-consensual sexual contact that is shaping, that helps us think through why women have suffered so much, paradoxically, in the notion of increased liberation. And another piece of that story is that her value is now more than ever defined by her sexual appeal. So there's lots of work done by the American Psychological Association, for example, on what has it meant to girls and women to experience such a highly sexualized culture, and what has it meant to her to be objectified and have sexuality inappropriately imposed. Now, I spend a lot of time talking to my male students who already feel unbelievable shame about their sexual desire, fear that they're not sure if they're good creatures, if you will. And with masculinity so denigrated, we have completely lost track of what healthy masculinity means to both women, children, and society. And so I have to spend a lot of time talking about the incredible, unique contributions that virtuous masculinity makes in the lives of children and women and society. We have been deprived of it for some decades now, post-divorce revolution. And I think also as an effect of this breaking apart of sex from marriage, it has been very destructive to men and depriving society and women and children of the essential gift of committed and virtuous masculinity. We desperately need and depend on that virtuous masculinity. So when I tell students about what the fallout has been from the sexual revolution, which means abortion on demand, that's what enabled that sexual revolution, then I think they get a bigger picture of why this has been so harmful to women in the end. This is just a list of what we know from the effects of sexualization and how it shapes sexual health and cognitive health and a host of other things, social, emotionally for women. So that just leads us into abortion. I really appreciated this powerful statement from Julia Hedrick in Public Discourse, which is largely a Catholic, conservative Catholic writing on public issues. But she just says, in most cases, abortion is a response to fear. And you who have worked with women who are facing this decision know this better than anyone. What it means to her facing this, all the fear that is there. Fears that are manifold: shame, rejection, physical suffering, entanglement with undesirable or even abusive partners, if they stay with this partner and bear this life, or derailment of their education or career. They may fear being an inadequate parent, having a special needs child, or robbing the children that they already have of scarce resources. Adoption carries, as you know, its own set of fears for them, and that list of fears that is part of that. And so appreciating what it is like for a woman in these circumstances and how problematic what we offer her as choices are. And so this meant a lot to me when in 2016, reading this powerful piece by a woman who'd been very pro-choice across the 1970s, 80s, 90s. She witnessed an abortion in the mid 2010s. And remarkably, once she saw it, she just could never go back. And it led her on a path to really uncovering what was behind this abortion on demand movement. And so she writes very powerfully, no one wants an abortion as she wants an ice cream cone or a Porsche. She wants an abortion as an animal caught in a trap wants to gnaw off its own leg. If nobody wants to have an abortion, why are women doing it 2,800 times a day? If women are doing something 2,800 times daily that they don't want to do, this is not liberation we've won. We are colluding in a strange new form of oppression. And then she writes powerfully that what happened with abortion on demand is that all the difficult issues now got shoved down the funnel of abortion. If the pregnancy causes trouble for the man, if the pregnancy causes trouble for the public, the educational institution, for a career place, for right, a work setting, for her parents, the solution, that all-powerful solution, is abortion. And in that, no one is presumably inconvenienced. It doesn't cause trouble for the father, her boss, or embarrass her parents, and so she bears the brunt of what no one else wants to deal with. Once it's available, it becomes the logical, reasonable choice, and all the complexities can be shoved down that funnel. But powerfully, it solves them inside her body. And she is expected to keep that pain inside for a lifetime and told by the broader culture to be grateful for the gift of abortion. So in citing and discussing what Supreme Court language is around this, it really follows this first statement. We somehow bought the idea that abortion was necessary. This is Justice Ginsburg's own language. If women were going to rise in their professions and compete in the marketplace with men. As such, she is viewed in her capacity to bear life, in her sexual reality, in that asymmetry from men. She is viewed as a deformed man, needing to deny her life-giving capacity in order to be equal. And so I will just tell students straight up, abortion does not remedy inequality for women. It entrenches it. Because no one has to deal with the issues as to why that woman is in that trap in the first place. We completely ignore them. And in doing so, we do not acknowledge and respect the sexual difference between men and women. We do not actually see women in their unique embodied reality. And instead of shaping our educational institutions and workplaces to respect and protect and support their childbearing, Abortion encourages us to ignore them and their capacity to bear life. And as such, instead of remedying the challenges and injustices faced by pregnant women, abortion submits to them, masking and not responding to the realities women face. There's no way this is a pro-woman effort, to say nothing of the mental and the physical ramifications of abortion itself. Now, what's happened then that I alluded to before is we now tragically have fewer marriageable men. You have 80% of women pursuing 20% of men. The crisis of marriageability is very real, as well as less commitment and a sexually permissive climate where women are easily objectified. Because as we've already noted, and you know so well, abortion allows men to be absolved of any responsibility for the gift of life. And so what abortion is doing is it's teaching us that relationships are terminable at will, that there is no such thing as commitment to one another, only the autonomous self. And love and sacrifice and commitment are contingent on whether or not it works for you. It's as if the woman is told, and the baby, the life, is told, I will love and care for you when it works for me. Now, just to go a little bit deeper into this, it's interesting that the language in 1973 in the pro-abortion movement was language around this. This is taken from statements advocating for it. New indigents, that's the impoverished, will burden the state in the long, long years ahead. The cancer of poverty will continue to grow without taxpayer support for abortion. And so what you hear in this message is an advocacy for terminating life that is assumed to inherently be a burden to the state because it is life of the impoverished. What would, and so you know who's borne the brunt of that, it's our Black women, it's our impoverished women. So and I'll just have students think about what would it look like if we were actually pro-life, pro-woman, pro-Black. Marianne Glendon, that remarkable Harvard law scholar, will say a real community would go out to meet her needs, provide the assistance and support she needed to fulfill her duties to her child. A real community would think long and hard about the conditions that put her in this place. So authentic compassion is not sending a woman off to suffer alone, to bear the burden of all of that cultural effect that has shaped her decision-making around sexual participation and men not being responsible. Real compassion is not sending her off to suffer alone, but bearing it alongside her. Now, the other piece of that is, what is it meant for Downs? And one of my colleagues at BYU will say, Europe is almost entirely, there are no Downs people in parts of Europe. And the implications actually are problematic because we need that genetic diversity in order to create life. Just genetically, that genetic diversity is actually important. But what does it mean for the life of a Down syndrome person? What does it mean to a society to be deprived of the presence of these individuals because it meant they were a problem not to be born with? So Erica Bakayaki will just say, in this sexual liberation movement, there was this strange link between the feminist quest for liberty and equality and the libertine quest for sexual liberation, free use of sexual power. But in the end, as we have seen, that free love did not actually make women free. This notion that they could be autonomous and liberated from any higher norm is not real freedom or equality. What it has done is fortified power in the hands of the strong and compromised the strength and protection of the vulnerable, women and life. So Erica will just say very powerfully, what is the truth about human freedom? Human freedom is not the unbridled will to do as one likes. This is the denial of liberty, leading to its overthrow. It soon becomes the possession of a savage few. True freedom presupposes virtue, or in the Aristotelian language, excellence. And I love that when I can tell students very clearly, few concepts have more potential to mislead us than the idea that choice is the ultimate goal. We are we are swimming in the waters of that idea, and it has deprived us of so much, including a dramatic decrease in the marriage rate, a decrease in fertility, the notion that the good life is the autonomous, pleasure-seeking individual, with the fallout being an epidemic of loneliness and a tragically decreased mental health among our adolescents and young adults in particular. And the notion is, but just choice is what I need. Choice is what I need, as opposed to obligations and commitments and virtue. So the whole notion of a dignitarian feminist is this idea that freedom is grounded in choices that lead to true freedom. And so that means the value of children and others today that are subjected to the individual cost benefit analysis, because what's happened is we've traded an idea of virtue and freedom for consumer choice, the ability to just choose among one's preferences. And so all of our social relations, whether it's life that mothers bear, whether it's in the choosing of marital partners, are made over in the image of the market. So children, life are subjected to that individual cost benefit analysis, this good life that makes no room for the asymmetry of women in reproduction and caregiving, or for the value of children. And so the fallout of the abortion movement has actually been that we can't seem to get a fertility rate. We can't seem to have the desire as a populace to reproduce ourselves. To say nothing that the most vulnerable who are affected are those who are less privileged, the poor, because they no longer have the structure, the communal substructure, and the familial bonds that give us the footing to rise above. Okay. She has some very powerful statements that I'll just end with here, and then a story. That the early feminists, those British feminists, resisted this kind of orientation. They knew that the most good, true, and beautiful things could never be made over in the image of the market. And so they sought to elevate the work of home, because that was essential to the basic dignity of every human being. When we honor the home, when we honor a woman's body, we honor the dignity of life. But freedom without virtue reduces us to beasts. So human formation depends upon responsibility and duty. I love this very powerful statement from Camille Williams here in Provo, where she just says, each elective abortion is some woman's pain. Every abortion is some kind of failure, not of contraceptives, but the failure of human beings to care for each other. So I'm just going to end with an experience I had when I was writing about, for the public, the Deseret News specifically, about the decision of Andrew Cuomo, the governor of the state of New York, in 2019 to sign into law abortion up to 40 weeks. New York had a more restricted policy at the time, and you would see news about women who would get a diagnosis that the life they were carrying would not sustain life, would not live beyond birth, and yet they were required to carry that life, was the language of it. And so why shouldn't they have access to abortion up to 40 weeks once they had got that diagnosis? so they didn't have to endure the emotional burden of carrying a life they knew would not live long past birth. So at the time, I was trying to write about the issue, and I could hear in my mind the powerful statement from President Joseph F. Smith to his son as a missionary when he told him, "There's no good in attacking people's beliefs or positions or personhood, but rather build them a better house, and they will choose that house and abandon their own structure." And I knew that so often what is needed is not a dismantling of a person's a position or an attack of that position, but leading them to view a better way, a higher way. And I found this research so compelling. So this particular researcher had worked with women who had received a diagnosis. The fetus they were carrying would not sustain long past birth, would not live long past birth, a lethal diagnosis. And they got that choice. Do I abort this life or do I continue to bear this life through this pregnancy? And then he interviewed them after that decision and actually went into the hospital and interviewed these mothers and fathers right after the birth of this life who would not live long and and just looked at what the implications were. And remarkably, he found that 90, almost 98% of these mothers who decided to continue that pregnancy not only showed strong lack of regret, but described profound feelings of love, joy, and peace. And I just wept reading these interview descriptions as they would say things like, "I will always cherish the 3 hours I had with her. I got to hold my baby for an hour, no regrets. I got the chance to see her, hold her, and honor her sweet life. All my son knew was love. We are rich in love because of her. We would not change, we would not trade those 6 hours for anything in the world." In contrast, women who had chosen to abort, the result was significantly more despair, avoidance, and depression than those women who had continued their pregnancies. And that those women ultimately felt as if they were both betraying themselves and their babies. There was a better way. And you can hear in these beautiful interview statements the sanctity of life, however long it lives on earth, that brings so much richness to human beings. This caring for one another that reverberates back love and joy as we nurture life. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and so happy to discuss any of this. I hope it made sense to you. I realize it was a little bit academic. Camille, I'm so glad you're on. I see Camille's name there. We
That
should
was that was
have.
perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to add even one more. This is a close friend of mine who I played rugby with. Actually won a national championship with him, a club championship, and he and his wife just in March 27th. I'll read his Facebook post.
Mm.
Friday, March 27th, changed my life forever. My beautiful daughter, gosh, I'm going to cry. Noah June came into this world. She fought her hardest from day one. Many compliments from all the nurses about how beautiful and strong she was. Those 83 hours spent in the NICU room were both the hardest and the most cherished time. I will never forget your sweet face, soft skin, and getting to change your diapers. I love you.
Wow.
And I love that couple so much. They're so amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, Aiden. So beautiful. Thank you. Beautiful.
Do we have any questions for Jeanette? Oh, I wiped my tears away. Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you very much for that lovely talk. It resonated with something I had learned at a previous conference where Ryan Anderson spoke.
Mm,
And he said that essentially abortion is sort of a is downstream from the sexual revolution.
mm,
And I'm curious I'm struck sort of maybe drawing a few connections here is I remember Mary Harrington describing contraception, not abortion, as the first transhumanist technology. So, transhumanism, for those who are listening, is this ideology in Silicon Valley where humanity gets to redesign itself.
mm,
And I was wondering if there's something in sort of deep within modernity, if you will, that encourages us towards these sort of technological solutions. So, right, you start with Francis Bacon and science and technology and the relief of man, and that this is, in some sense, these biomedical technologies, such as abortion, are in some sense a natural or inevitable consequence of this idea of man is going to dominate nature, it's going to take over, all chance is going to be taken away, and all, we can just solve everything with technology and science. And sort of that sort of leads us to, where we are now. And if so, what would be the response to that if science and technology are sort of so deeply ingrained within the modern psyche?
mm. It's a really powerful statement. Thank you for sharing that in thought, Ryan. This is really an interesting question, right, Tress? So some of you are familiar with natural forms of contraception that especially conservative Catholics will talk about. And I think the research on that is really interesting because it will show what happens in a couple when they together honor the natural processes of life giving. And a woman, because it's mostly women that are taking in medications or other forms of contraception and bearing that alone, and again, calling it liberation. And I think we've missed something in that. Now, I realize we're so dependent on birth control that my students couldn't even comprehend living without birth control for the most part. But I think they're also awakening to the fact that we have at least more talk in the broader culture about what does that mean that she is for years taking this chemical into her body? What does it mean to women's liberation that she is the one who has to act against her body with the side effects that are part of that? And no one's really saying anything about it. In fact, they're calling it liberation. Could there be a better way? And I think that's what, right, that's what you're getting out there. Even though, and I know it's not an easy solution. There's no way that's an easy solution. But I also think it's worth talking about and elevating that conversation to thinking through what does this mean for women, and how could we think about this differently? There's a couple questions in the chat that I think
There
I can
is,
answer.
yeah. Just one thought on that. One thing that just came to mind in the way that I think about those questions is less
Yeah.
of an answer, but it's more of when when one science, quote unquote science, seems to betray others.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very careful of that. And the psychological, the philosophical, and the familial sciences that we do have that are
Yeah.
very resolute, that those are real things. There's a reason that we need art in our lives, philosophy and religion that go beyond just simple data points. And so when one new science seems to betray or cut out another one, me personally, I tend to be really wary of accepting that. Um,
That's
AI is a
very
great
thoughtful.
that makes me think about AI too. I'm just like,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
could be good, but when you start thinking about it down the road, it's like you're cutting out a whole lot of other science that we already have. So,
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. That's very powerfully described, I think, Aiden. That's a very thoughtful way to think about those decisions. And Ryan, you would know, conservative Catholics would really see contraception as the beginning of all of this problematic. And I don't think we have that same position in our church, um, but thinking through it in a deeper way, we really should be doing more of.
can you
Both of
see
these
the chat there?
I do, and
Okay.
both of these kind of are similar. And Camille, I you can. It's so funny because I don't have a lot of time to work with students on this topic in our eternal family class because it's one portion of many important topics. But every time I get more and more animated in as I'm talking to them about it because I get like it swells up inside me. This is not being true to women, and they can feel that. And I have not had pushback from students. I think they can hear my sincerity around caring for women in all situations, and they care about women. Their their resistance, I think, if any of them have resistance to the pro-life movement, is that it can feel like, what about disregarding women, right? And so I think it's been helpful for me to really, I spend the whole time almost talking about women. What does it mean to really be true to women? What does it really mean to honor women? And I think they have never heard that framing before. They have never actually uncovered what abortion on demand has done to women. And no one can deny the realities of what I talk about. They can't deny those. Those are there. And so I feel like it's been helpful um, to frame it around women, women's needs, women, how we should be honoring women, and as well as life, of course. And I haven't gotten negative feedback from BYU. I haven't had the Deseret News ever, but I don't usually get negative feedback for things that I talk about. I don't know why. But no, that's not been my experience to have anything but support really around all of these things from I did get one the most negative feedback I've had actually in presenting at BYU was two students on the front row who were very upset at the church's position that would allow for any exceptions around abortion. And I had to just say, well, I have had siblings who were sexually abused. No one conceived from it, but I think that's another experience that you have to think deeply about and those realities. So um, anyway,
There's
Madeira, yeah,
another question in the chat. Do you consider the discarding of an IVF embryo to be an abortion?
yeah. These are such important questions. I'll never forget when I was talking with someone about a dear friend who was conceiving life through donor embryos. And I'd been working through the adoption literature and I'd been working through the implications of that severance of a biological relationship for children. And it made me wary that you would intentionally create life that would inherently have a biological rupture from their parents. Does that make sense? It's bearing life. It's intentionally having a child who will be separated from their biological parents.
Mhm.
So I brought it up with someone I thought would be very much on my side about that. And she was Catholic and she was like, "No, we need those embryos brought to life. Like to discard them, right, would be to mistreat life." And so it was the first time where I was like, "Oh, okay, this is really interesting." So I I think we need to take seriously life at the very origins. I also am not sure about bringing all of those embryos into full existence as a full human person. And I think in our faith, um, there's a spectrum. So I don't know exactly how to answer this question. I just think we see it differently than conservative Catholics see it.
Mhm.
Um, who the we is, I don't know. This is me and my perceptions of the position of the church. And I do get concerned about donor conception and what it means for children, those children who are donor conceived. I think we have to take that very seriously. I wouldn't say it's always bad. I sometimes I hear people talk that way, and I can't take that position. But I think we need to take it really seriously. So does that answer that at all, Madeira?
That was good. I think that was good. That's pretty much about our time, so I think we'll wrap up here. Um, Thank you so much for your time and for your everything today. That was amazing. I have just one more little challenge for people here on my slide here. Um, Share with your ward. We have our this is on our website. Suzanne, is there a page on the website for this? I think it's there it is
Yeah,
down there.
you
Yeah,
go
Latter-day
to the
Saints for Life.org.
resources.
That's right.
Yeah, you go to the resources and you can print different versions of it. There's a poster for like just one page, and there's a two-sided, and there's links to everything. So if you're on the computer, you can just go right to the links of the resources. It's really wonderful, actually.
Yeah, yeah. So that's our little challenge. We have a little challenge at the end. Share with your ward the pregnancy resources, and invite a friend to join in. Suzanne, could I invite you to give our closing prayer today?
Sure.
So fun to see you again, Suzanne. So fun.
You too. Thank you so much.